In the dry, scorching afternoon of the North Nevada desert, Silver Butte Diner sat motionless beside Highway 93, sunlight pouring onto the silver metal sign and making it glow faintly like a mirage in the wilderness. And inside, after the lunch rush, only the clink of spoons against coffee cups from two truckers out of Utah, and the sound of Donna Reyes wiping tables remained. The woman in her 50s, long accustomed to the solitude of roadside diners, three bikers from Iron Viper's MC, Rex Dalton, with the sun-darkened face of a man who had lived more than half his life on the open road, Bear O'Connor, built like a wall of meat with a thick gray beard, and Miguel Ghost Alvarez, the quiet former Marine, sat in the corner, silently eating a late lunch. Then the diner door burst open with such force that the metal bell hanging above it fell, clattering across the floor. A 9-year-old girl came rushing in, barefoot, desert sand still clinging to the floor beneath her feet, a thin hoodie covered in dust, hair tangled and matted from the hot wind, and a small face streaked with tears. Breathing in ragged gasps, voice breaking with sobs but forcing out each word, Maddie Thompson repeated in panic, "He's coming, my stepdad is coming. He's coming." Donna startled and dropped her rag. The two coffee-drinking truckers froze mid-sip, and Ghost turned his head slightly, the reflex of someone who had heard more emergency sounds in one lifetime than most could bear. Rex set his cup down, eyes sharp but calm, while Bear raised an eyebrow at the sight of the girl's raw red feet, as if she had run a very long way in 104-degree heat. Maddie spun frantically, looking at everyone, her mind clearly searching for a safe anchor in the unfamiliar room. Then those big round eyes stopped, not on Donna, not on the two truckers, but on the three bikers sitting motionless in the corner. It wasn't a hopeless plea for help, it was something else, an instinctive, fierce certainty from a child who had run the very last stretch and recognized exactly who could save her. Rex tilted his head slightly. Ghost set down his spoon. Bear let out a low, rumbling sigh. None of them spoke first, but they all understood the real storm had just walked into the diner. The roar of an engine outside made the entire diner freeze, and through the dust-covered glass window, a silver Ford F-150 slid into the parking lot, the blazing sun reflecting off the windshield like a searing flare in the midday heat. The door opened, and the man stepped out, Derek Caldwell, about 40, wearing a neatly pressed light blue dress shirt with the collar buttoned up, short office guy hair that made him look like he'd stepped out of an insurance commercial rather than the red dust road outside. He pushed open the diner door and walked in, a polite smile already fixed in place like a mask he'd practiced in the mirror. "Maddie, you ran off again. She has a big imagination. Sorry, everyone. She has some behavioral issues." His voice was syrupy smooth but didn't land on anyone in the room, especially not Maddie, because the instant he spoke, the girl shrank back toward Bear, her tiny hands clutching the leg of the huge man's leather pants like she was gripping a shield. "That's not true," Maddie choked out, breathing in gasps. "He hit my mom last night. Mom told me to run." Donna stood frozen with the rag in her hand, torn between Derek's pleasant politeness and the raw, suffocating terror in the child's voice. But Rex, Bear, and Ghost weren't fooled by the tidy appearance. They saw what regular people miss, faint scratches beneath the collar of Derek's shirt, like desperate fingernails had clawed there, the smell of alcohol masked by mint gum, and the way he stood squarely in the doorway, not just entering, but blocking the exit. He took another step forward, the smile stiffening. "Maddie, let's go home. You're making your mom worry." Maddie trembled, voice breaking wide open. "He locked me in the basement. My mom screamed all night." The two truckers exchanged glances and set their cups down, tension rising. Ghost leaned forward off his seat. Bear growled deep in his chest, and Rex simply placed his hand slowly on the table, as if the moment he lifted it from the wood everything would change. No one in the diner remained indifferent. The air in the small room thickened, heavy, taut, and in that moment the silence was heavier than Maddie's crying, while the man at the door kept his fake smile and his hand clenched the car keys until the knuckles went white. Maddie sobbed, her small shoulders hunching as Derek took another half step inside, and like a baby bird back to the edge of the nest, she blurted out everything that had been crushed inside her for months. He locked me in the storage room behind the house. The pitch-black room with no windows. I don't know if it was hours or days." Her voice shook, eyes wide as if still trapped in that darkness. "He said, if Mom didn't shut up, if Mom didn't obey, he would." She swallowed hard, throat raw, then burst into tears. He said he'd kill my mom. A thick silence fell over the diner like a heavy curtain. Donna clutched the rag until her knuckles went white, and an old memory flashed. Months ago, Maddie had come in with her mother to buy pie, a bruise on her arm, and the girl had only said, "I fell off my bike," with the exact same terrified eyes she had now. Donna had believed her, or wanted to believe her, because it was easier than digging into someone else's family. A chill ran down her spine. "Maddie," she whispered, voice catching. Derek kept the fake smile pinned to his face. "Everybody, don't listen to her. My wife, she's unstable. She has mental problems. The kid gets influenced and exaggerates." He spoke in the calm voice of a man used to explaining things to neighbors, teachers, doctors, the kind of man who believed that if he just spoke nicely enough, people would side with him. But the three bikers weren't that kind of people. Ghost tilted his head, eyes sharpening like a thin blade. "If you're so worried about your wife," he stared straight at Derek's bare left hand, "then where's your wedding ring?" Derek froze for one heartbeat, but that single heartbeat was enough to strip the smile clean off his face. He briefly reached into his pocket as if searching for an explanation, but nothing came out except a forced laugh. "Left it at home." "When's the last time you wore it?" Ghost pressed, voice low and soft but heavier than any roar. Derek didn't answer, eyes flicking to Maddie, to the door, then trying to force the nice guy face back on. But Maddie stepped forward, gripping the edge of the table, voice shattered but resolute. "Please call the Nye County Sheriff's Office. Please, they have to save my mom." The last words dissolved into sobs, but their weight hit the room like a punch to the chest. Adults can lie, but a trembling child with blistered feet, looking straight at the grown-ups and begging, that doesn't know how to lie. Donna reached for the phone. The two truckers stood fully up, and Rex leaned slightly forward. His eyes were no longer just watching. They had chosen a side. The air in the diner shifted completely, thickening, tilting entirely toward the little girl brave enough to say out loud what the adults in her life never wanted spoken. Donna dialed with slightly shaking hands, the old red wall phone pressed to her ear, while Maddie stood right beside her, looking up with a tear-streaked face, trying to breathe enough to speak clearly. "My address, 2470 East Calico Avenue, in Pahrump, Nevada." Her voice was weak but firm, as if every number she forced out was a stitch trying to hold her family together over the abyss. Donna repeated the address to the dispatcher, eyes never leaving Maddie, and everyone in the room held their breath. Derek stood near the door, keys clenched so hard his knuckles were pale, eyes flashing irritation that Maddie was speaking so clearly, so calmly for a child he'd called imaginative. Donna swallowed dryly, waiting. Then suddenly the dispatcher's voice came through clearly, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "We received a domestic violence call from that address last night. Units were dispatched, but no one answered the door." The room fell into a chilling silence. The two truckers straightened fully, no longer leaning on their seats. Rex tilted his head, eyes sharpening like headlights cutting through darkness, while Bear, rarely changing expression, clenched his fists so hard the veins stood out on the backs of his hands. Ghost exhaled slowly, but the breath sounded like preparation before diving into a situation he'd faced in the core, real chaos, not anyone's imagination. Maddie stopped crying. She stood motionless, as if the dispatcher's words had confirmed the one thing she needed. The adults out there had finally heard. Derek, on the other hand, changed instantly. The painted-on friendliness vanished in a blink. The smooth smile he used to glide through other people's lives shrank into a thin, tense line. He opened his mouth to speak, but the first sound was no longer gentle. It was harsh, twisted, the loss of control seeping into every fiber of his voice. That was just a misunderstanding," he ground out, eyes darting around the room for an exit. "My wife, she gets hysterical. Maybe she called, and then panicked and hung up. Don't get the wrong idea." But no one answered him. No one believed him anymore, not after the dispatcher confirmed a cry for help from the exact address Maddie had given. Donna pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes red with regret, for not asking last time, for not looking closer, for letting a child walk out of her diner with bruises she'd tried to ignore, so it wouldn't hurt so much. Bear shifted to stand fully in front of Maddie, his huge shadow covering nearly half her tiny body. Ghost turned slowly, the instinct of a man trained to protect, while Rex only needed one slight glance to make Derek step back half a pace. The diner that had been just a quiet, boring roadside stop in the burning noon now felt compressed by an invisible pressure. Everyone sensed the violent shift in balance. One side a neatly dressed man, who spoke pleasantly, but whose face was cracking with fear of being exposed. The other a trembling child speaking an undeniable truth, backed by the police department itself. No one said a word, but the entire room had already chosen. The scale no longer teetered. It had tipped completely toward Maddie. Derek stood frozen after the dispatcher's confirmation, but only for a moment. The panic on his face turned into something else, rage that had been bottled up too long. The real man he'd hidden behind the pressed shirt. He suddenly barked, dropping every pretense of civility. "Maddie, that's enough. Why are you putting on this show in front of strangers?" The shout cracked through the air like a whip. Maddie flinched hard, small shoulders curling inward, eyes flashing with the terror of a small animal that already knows what always follows a yell. It wasn't ordinary childhood fear. It was reflex, the reflex of someone who had endured too much pain and knew a shout always brought something worse. Derek took a big step forward, hand reaching to grab Maddie's arm, but Bear was already on his feet before the hand could touch her. The huge man rose like a mountain, his shadow swallowing Maddie, voice rumbling down low and dangerous like distant thunder. "Do not take another step." Derek stopped, but only for half a second, then tried to regain control with a dismissive wave. "Get out of my way. I'm taking her home. She's my daughter." Maddie immediately shook her head furiously from behind Bear's back. I'm not his. He's lying," she screamed, voice shattering like glass on the floor. Derek clenched his jaw. Every layer of fake decency he'd plastered on since walking in now broken. He didn't look at Maddie. He looked at Bear, at Ghost, at Rex. Like he was calculating who he could take down first, or which gap he could slip through to reach Maddie without being grabbed. "I said." Derek snarled through his teeth. "I'm taking her home." He spun quickly, trying to circle around the tables to get to Maddie from the other side. But Ghost was already up, moving with the decisive speed of a soldier who had faced men far more dangerous than Derek. Ghost didn't even need to touch him. One sideways step and eyes cold as steel stopped Derek in his tracks. "You're not taking anyone anywhere." Derek changed direction again, eyes on the door, clearly thinking of bolting outside and coming back another way. He sucked in a breath, backing toward the door, keys still clenched. "I have rights. I'll sue you all for kidnapping. But before he finished, Maddie darted closer, clinging to Rex's arm like she was holding the only tree still standing in a storm. Her eyes looked up, pleading so desperately it twisted adult hearts. Please don't let him take me." Rex wasn't a man who showed much emotion. He'd lived too long on endless dry highways, seen too many people lose everything. But Maddie's eyes, terrified, begging, and fully aware of what would happen if she was dragged out that door, hit him like tires screeching on hot asphalt. He bent down a little so she could see his eyes clearly, his weathered hand resting gently on her head, not pulling, just reassuring. And then he said the words that made the whole room hold its breath. "Kid," Rex said, voice low and solid as stone. "You ran to the right table." Maddie burst into tears, not from fear this time, but because for the first time someone had fully taken her side. Derek's face turned crimson when he heard it, veins bulging in his neck. He pointed at Rex. "Who the hell are you to interfere in my family?" Bear answered for him, voice like iron scraping stone. "We're the ones she ran to when she was so scared her feet barely touched the ground." Derek looked around, exit blocked by Ghost, Maddie shielded by Bear, Donna glaring in fury, the two truckers leaning forward ready if he tried anything. He tried to swallow his panic and roared one last time like a cornered Dorbus. "I'm calling the cops." You should," Rex cut in, voice terrifyingly calm. "Because we just did." In that moment Derek understood the balance had truly slipped from his grasp. No one in the room believed him. No one would let him take Maddie, and the door he had once blocked now looked like the jaws of a trap snapping shut with him inside. Outside the desert still burned, wind still blew sand across the parking lot, but inside Silver Butte Diner a confrontation had officially begun, and the only person without a single ally was Derek Caldwell. Derek looked around like a wild animal backed into a cage corner, breathing hard, eyes darting wildly for any hand-width gap to escape. He knew every passing second tipped the scales further toward Maddie, and the people now forming a solid wall between him and the girl. Then suddenly he spun, shoved the diner door hard, and bolted outside like a man fleeing a fire. Desert sand whipped up by the wind followed his frantic steps as he sprinted straight to the silver Ford F-150 parked under the blazing sun. "He's running," one of the truckers shouted, but Bear had already seen it. Despite his massive size, he moved with surprising speed and burst out the door almost right behind Derek, each stride nearly twice as long. Derek yanked the driver's door open, slid into the seat, and frantically reached into the glove box for something, maybe the keys, maybe something else, muttering curses, hands shaking. But just as he jammed the key into the ignition and turned it without the engine catching, Bear's huge iron clamp hand shot through the open door and locked onto his wrist with terrifying precision. "Not today," Bear growled. Then with a practiced twist he'd used fixing bikes his whole life, he ripped the keys out of the ignition like taking candy from a child. Derek jerked, eyes bulging. "Give those back. You have no right." Bear stepped back, holding the keys high out of reach, face stone cold. "I don't. But the sheriff does, and the sheriff's coming." Derek lunged halfway out the door trying to grab them anyway, but the crunch of gravel under someone else's boots made him whip around. Ghost was already standing dead center in front of the truck's hood, feet planted wide, stance solid as concrete, eyes unblinking, no weapon, no threat spoken, just the posture of a man who had faced real danger and knew exactly how much space was enough to control without wasted violence. Seeing Ghost, Derek froze, hands still gripping the door frame, breath catching. "Move," he tried to bark, but it came out more like a plea than a command. Ghost didn't budge. No. One short word, enough to make Derek realize the path ahead was sealed. He twisted toward the rear of the truck, hoping to circle around the lot and escape, but Rex was already there, standing straight, arms loose at his sides, seasoned eyes colder than the desert glare. He didn't need to speak. His presence was the statement. Left Ghost, right Bear, behind Rex. 3 men, 3 walls, 3 pairs of unwavering eyes. The wide-open Silver Butte Diner parking lot now felt to Derek like a sealed box with no way out. He tried to backpedal and tripped over the door sill, staggering. You can't do this to me. I'll sue." "Go ahead and sue," Rex said, voice low and so calm it made Derek shiver. "But before you do, you're gonna stand right here until the sheriff arrives." Bear stood beside him, idly jingling Derek's keys like a final reminder that every escape attempt had ended the second he walked into that diner. Derek stared at the truck, at the men surrounding him, then at the diner door, where Maddie stood half hidden behind Donna, eyes wide, looking at him no longer like the monster she feared, but the monster she had just escaped. The desert heat, the hot wind, the blinding sun, all of it weighed less than the truth crushing down on Derek's shoulders. He was no longer in control of anything. And when that realization hit, for the first time that whole afternoon, Derek Caldwell truly looked like a man about to be swept clean out of the life he'd tried to rule with fists and smooth words. Rex took one more step closer, sunlight slanting over his shoulder, and making his old but razor-sharp eyes flash. He looked at Derek panting like a trapped animal, glanced at Bear and Ghost, and gave a single short nod. The order already understood. Gear up. No further words needed. Bear flicked his wrist, tossed Derek's keys to Donna to hold, and adjusted his leather gloves like he was settling in for familiar work. Ghost tilted his head and stepped back into position at the truck's front, like sliding the last bolt on an emergency exit. Derek kept trying to find the people inside the diner. The 2 truckers, Donna, Maddie, watched the 3 bikers walk out into the skin-cracking desert heat, but to them those men weren't just leaving the building, they were stepping up. Carrying the kind of presence that needs no badge, no authority, just honor and the instinct to shield the weak, forming its own law, the law of long roads, asphalt, and engines. Maddie peeked from behind Donna, half her face showing. Her swollen, tear-stained eyes followed the 3 broad backs like she was watching knights who rode thunder instead of horses. Men she hadn't known existed that morning, but now trusted completely, as if they had been born just to stand between her and the dark. When Derek saw them closing in, his face twisted, fear and rage mixed into a dark smoke behind his eyes. He yanked open the door pocket and dug inside. In that moment everyone saw what he pulled out. A tire iron, the long steel bar flashing cold under the desert sun. Donna screamed, "Derek, put it down." But he didn't listen. Maddie whimpered behind her, clinging to Donna's shirt, small body shaking like a leaf. Derek backed out of the truck, gripping the iron tight, whole body coiled to swing at anyone in his way. Bear narrowed his eyes, shoulders wide enough to eclipse half the sun behind him, but his calm only made Derek more frantic. "What exactly are you planning to do with that?" Bear asked, voice as casual as talking about the weather. Derek didn't answer. just growled, half threat, half desperate attempt to reclaim control he'd already lost completely. Ghost took half a step forward. No weapon drawn, no hands raised, just positioning himself exactly where a seasoned soldier knows is enough to stop without provoking. "Don't do anything stupid," he said, voice low but ringing like steel on steel. Derek spun and swung wildly to clear a path, but Bear had spent decades in rough biker bars blocking worse drunk swings than this. In one glance he read the arc, shifted his feet faster than Derek's arm, and caught the iron against his thick leather-clad forearm. Then he twisted Derek's wrist the way you handle a stubborn bolt, not hard enough to break, just enough to make the man drop it from pure pain. The tire iron clanged to the ground. Derek stumbled, and before he could straighten, Rex was already behind the truck. He didn't use force, just placed one weathered hand on Derek's shoulder, but the weight behind that hand, slow, heavy and solid as wet cement, pinned Derek in place like nails through his feet. "It's over," Rex said, voice so calm it chilled the air. "Your storm stops here." Donna had run to the doorway, hand shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone but still managed to redial the sheriff. "Suspect is armed," she gasped. "He just pulled a tire iron. Get here now." Inside the diner, Maddie watched the confrontation through the cracked open door. She saw Derek trapped between three bikers like a dangerous but arrogant predator finally stripped of claws and fangs. She saw Bear still standing like a mountain. She saw Ghost lower his shoulders, ready to block any further attack. She saw Rex right beside Derek, eyes no longer angry, just the eyes of a man who had seen too many bullies misuse strength and knew exactly how to end them. Derek snarled and thrashed, but there was no chance left. Every exit was sealed. The wheels of fate he had used to crush Maddie and her mother's lives now stood still, blocked by 3 pairs of worn biker boots that had traveled thousands of miles. Sirens rose in the distance, first just a thin wail through the shimmering desert heat, then growing louder and clearer each second, as if the sky itself was stretching open to make way for justice. Red and blue lights spun across the sand as 3 Nye County Sheriff's patrol cars screamed into the Silver Butte Diner lot, followed by a Child Protective Services vehicle. Before the cars fully stopped, 2 deputies were out, hands resting on holsters, eyes sweeping the scene. One disheveled man in rumpled clothes standing in the lot, a tire iron lying on the ground, 3 bikers planted like iron pillars in front of him. The instant Derek saw uniforms, he let out an almost desperate shout. "They're holding me. They attacked me. These guys, hands behind your back." A deputy cut in, voice hard as steel. "Now." Derek took one step back, trying to argue, but Bear just tilted his head, and Ghost shifted half a step left, making it clear choices were limited. The deputies closed in, spun him around and cuffed his wrists with practiced efficiency, until all Derek could do was groan. The metallic click of the handcuffs rang out, small but heavy enough to collapse the last lie he was clinging to. One deputy read clearly, "Derek Caldwell, you are under arrest for suspected domestic violence, endangering a minor and resisting an officer." Derek snarled. No, she's lying. She quiet and stand still," the deputy replied, not letting him finish another word. Meanwhile, Maddie was led outside by Donna. But the moment she saw Derek in cuffs, her small body shrank like a leaf in strong wind, hands trembling as she clutched Donna's shirt. A female CPS worker approached, voice gentle. "Sweetheart, you're safe now. We'll just talk here for a bit." Maddie nodded, but her eyes were still full of tears and fear. Ghost saw it, stepped over without a word, gently removed his faded Iron Viper's patch-covered leather jacket, and draped it over her shoulders. The jacket was heavy, reaching almost to her feet. But the moment it settled, Maddie froze, her breathing steadied one notch, as if that thick biker leather could block last night's screams and the darkness of the storage room Derek had locked her in. Rex stood nearby, arms crossed, giving a slight nod when he saw Maddie lean into Ghost. Bear stepped back a little, to let the officers work, but never took his eyes off Derek in case he tried anything else despite the cuffs. One deputy knelt to Maddie's eye level, voice serious yet kind. "You're Maddie Thompson, right? Can you tell me what happened at home last night?" Maddie opened her mouth, but the first sound was only a choked breath. Ghost bent down, placed a light hand on her back through the jacket, and whispered, "It's okay, kid. Take your time. Nobody's touching you again." Hearing that, Maddie drew a deep breath and, in a trembling but anchored voice, began telling everything she had only dared keep in her head for months. Another deputy took notes, CPS recorded for the file, and Donna stood beside her, hand on the girl's shoulder as proof she no longer faced this nightmare alone. After a few minutes, Maddie looked up, eyes red but clearer, and asked her first question not to the police but to Rex. He can't come back, right? Rex met her gaze straight on, voice low and heavy as an old oath. As long as we're standing here, no. Maddie clutched Ghost's jacket tighter, as if it were physical proof of that promise. The sheriff arrived last, surveyed the scene, looked at Maddie, at cuffed Derek, then at the three bikers. No one needed to speak. It was obvious, no matter how hot the desert sand or blinding the sun, at that moment, Silver Butte Diner was the one place Maddie was truly safe, because today, three bikers had stepped up, and justice had followed right behind them. One deputy, after taking Maddie's initial statement, spoke quickly with the sheriff. Two patrol units immediately peeled off toward the address she had given, 2470 East Calico Avenue in Pahrump. When the doors slammed and tires kicked up dust, the convoy sped off with the urgency of men who knew every minute could mean life or death for a woman who had stayed silent too long. Maddie watched them go, hands clenched around Ghost's jacket, eyes scared but hopeful again, while Donna gently stroked her hair, and Ghost stood beside her like an unbreakable pillar. At the other end of town, the deputies pulled up to a small beige house with peeling paint, front door ajar as if someone had left in too much hurry to close it. One deputy knocked and called, "Sheriff's office. Anyone inside?" No answer. The second pressed an ear to the door, listened, then whispered, "I hear footsteps or breathing, very faint." They exchanged a look with the sheriff. One nod and the door was rammed open with a breaching tool, hinges groaning. The house was darker than midday should allow. A mix of hard liquor, dust, and something damp and heavy hit everyone who entered like a cold wave. They moved slowly, flashlights sweeping corners. Then at the end of the hall in the small kitchen they found Maddie's mother slumped beside the dining table, one hand still loosely holding a cracked screen phone that had died before the call went through. Her face was swollen, lips split, deep bruises running down her neck. When the flashlight beam hit her, she jerked upright, eyes wide with animal panic. "Maddie, where's Maddie?" Derek took her. Her voice was raw, barely audible. "She's safe," the deputy said immediately, kneeling and placing a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. "She's with us at Silver Butte Diner. You're safe now. We're here to help." The woman broke into sobs, her whole body shaking, as if every ounce of strength drained out. The deputies quickly assessed her injuries, old and new bruises layered on arms, ribs, back. One deputy shook his head, voice low. Not the first time. They kept searching, and evidence was everywhere. Derek had tried but failed to hide in his rage. A large fist-sized hole in the kitchen wall, older purple handprints trailing down like someone had been pinned hard. An open bottle of liquor on the table, the air thick with its smell. One deputy checked the doorbell camera and pulled footage from last night, chaotic but heartbreakingly clear. A woman's screams, Derek's shadow flashing past, objects crashing, then the camera shaking violently as someone slammed the door. "We've got everything," the sheriff said, voice no longer just professional but laced with the anger of a father and a man who had seen too many families broken by men like Derek. They lifted Maddie's mother onto a stretcher, moving as gently as possible. "We're taking you to Desert View Hospital for x-rays and full examination," a deputy told her. She grabbed his hand, voice a breaking thread. "My baby, Maddie, tell her mom never left her." "We will," he answered, "and you'll see her soon." As the ambulance pulled away, yellow lights spinning then disappearing down the road, the sheriff stood looking at the half-open front door, and sighed. "He did this too long," he said quietly, "but never again." One deputy nodded, eyes toward Silver Butte Diner, because the kid ran to the right place. The sheriff adjusted his duty belt, closed the patrol car door, and spoke one simple line that carried the weight of the entire afternoon. Because three bikers stood in the right place. A deputy returned to Silver Butte Diner first, with the news that Maddie's mother was alive and en route to Desert View Hospital. When Maddie heard "Your mom is safe," her little legs buckled onto the tile floor, hands clutching Ghost's jacket like it was a heartbeat that had just come back. Donna knelt and wrapped her in a hug while Ghost stepped half a pace back to give space, but kept scanning the room as if any shadow could still be Derek, even though he was cuffed in a patrol car. Soon the second sheriff's vehicle arrived, and Deputy Morales, the one with the calm, warm voice and patient manner, walked in carrying a clipboard and a still blinking body cam. "Maddie," he called softly, crouching to her level. "Now we need you to tell us everything. Not to hurt you more, but to protect you and your mom forever after. Can you do that? Maddie wiped tears with the sleeve of Ghost's jacket, lips dry but nodding. I can. CPS followed. A sandy-haired woman named Miss Laurel, who sat beside Donna, opened her notebook, eyes sharp yet kind. The sheriff arrived last, and when he took his place as the final piece of the protective circle around Maddie, the atmosphere inside the diner became strangely solid, like truth had nowhere left to hide. Maddie started talking. At first her voice was a thread. He started changing. After Mom lost her job in the old town, Mom tried to hold everything together so we wouldn't lose the house, but he drank a lot. With each sentence her voice grew clearer, even as her hands still trembled clutching the jacket. Some nights, Mom cried in her room thinking I was asleep, but I wasn't. I heard him slamming tables, slamming doors. He said, if Mom didn't obey he'd teach her lessons like he taught other people. The sheriff's brow furrowed slightly, but he didn't interrupt. Maddie drew a deep breath, small shoulders rising and falling as she steadied herself. One time he locked me in the storage room behind the house. No light, no window. I didn't know if it was an hour or a day. I just heard Mom calling, covering her mouth so he wouldn't hear. Donna rested a hand on Maddie's shoulder, patting gently like a lullaby. Maddie kept going, eyes on the floor as if each word dragged the old house's darkness with it. He said, if I ever told anyone, Mom would lose me forever. He said no one believes a kid. No one would believe me, that I was just a troublemaker. Tears fell onto the table like hot drops. Last night, he got mad because Mom wouldn't give him her phone. Mom pushed me into the bedroom and told me to lock the door. I still heard Mom crying, then him yelling, then something breaking. After that, Mom whispered through the crack, if I scream again you run. Run to where there are grown-ups. Don't come back. Donna choked, covering her mouth. Maddie clenched her tiny fists. When he went downstairs, I ran. My feet hurt on the rocks. I couldn't breathe, but I kept running until I saw the diner sign. Deputy Morales drew a slow breath, then spoke with pure respect. You just did the bravest thing a child can do, Maddie. You ran to safety while you still could. You saved your mom. Maddie stopped crying, but her eyes widened as she looked past Morales' shoulder at the three bikers standing in a silent row behind her. Rex's arms crossed, bare immovable as a warehouse pillar, Ghost dipping his head in a quiet salute. Maddie swallowed, then said in a small but stronger voice than any statement before, I ran to them because they looked like people who wouldn't turn away. Ghost's lips pressed together, not anger but something else, as if the girl's words had struck a memory he carried from the battlefield, where he'd seen too many adults look the other way from things they didn't want to be responsible for. Bear drew a deep breath, massive shoulders shifting slightly. Rex just gave one nod. No praise, no comfort, but his eyes held exactly what Maddie needed. Confirmation she had been right. The sheriff looked from the bikers to Maddie and said, and they did what good people do, stood between you and the danger. Maddie turned fully, staring at Rex, Bear, Ghost for several long seconds. No child should understand fear as deeply as she did, but few children ever get to point at three strangers and say they trusted them not to turn their backs. CPS finished notes. The sheriff signed the report and declared from now on no one comes near you without our permission. You will be protected. Maddie nodded slightly, pulling Ghost's jacket tighter around her like borrowing one more layer of courage from it. In that small room where desert wind slipped through the door crack, where the faint rumble of biker engines still lingered like a silent vow, the heavy silence that had lived inside Maddie for months finally cracked. The truth had been spoken. For the first time in a very long while, she wasn't speaking it alone. Maddie was taken to Desert View Hospital right after giving her statement, and just a few hours later, as the purple dusk began settling over the barren mountains around Pahrump, she was allowed into the hospital room where her mother lay. The woman was on her side, an IV in her arm, face bruised but the swelling already going down, chest rising and falling in tired breaths. When Maddie stepped in and the door clicked softly shut, her mother's eyelids fluttered, then opened. Maddie. Her voice was as faint as desert wind. Brushing the window, Maddie ran and threw herself into her mother's arms, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time light with relief, like she had found something she thought was lost forever. Her mother held her tight, trembling hands stroking the girl's hair as if touching her to make sure she was really there. You got out. You did it. You escaped. She choked. Maddie nodded, face buried in the soft, wrinkled hospital gown. I ran to where the grown-ups were. You told me to run. Her mother drew a deep breath and nearly broke down again, as Maddie told her everything, the barefoot run, the pain in her feet, the hot wind burning her face, and finally the Silver Butte Diner door bursting open, and the three bikers who stood up when she screamed, "He's coming." Something changed in her mother's eyes, from pain to a gratitude so deep her whole body seemed to soften. "My baby," she whispered, "you did what I was never brave enough to do." When Maddie got to the part where Bear, Ghost, and Rex blocked Derek, her mother put a hand to her chest as if to keep her heart from leaping out. "They really did that?" "Yes." Maddie nodded hard. "They stood in the way. Nobody let him near me." Her mother closed her eyes, tears sliding across bruised temples. A moment later, when she could breathe again, she told CPS, "I want to meet them. Please let me meet them." CPS spoke quickly with the sheriff, and minutes later 3 men, Rex, Bear, and Ghost, stood in the doorway, fluorescent lights stretching their shadows long behind them. None of them moved forward right away. Rex just gave a small nod, waiting for permission from the woman on the bed. When she nodded, they stepped inside. No one spoke at first. The room was so quiet the heart monitor could be heard. Then the mother found her raspy but clear voice. You saved my daughter." Rex shook his head almost imperceptibly. "No, ma'am. The kid saved herself. We just stood in the doorway," Bear snorted, trying to hide a thick breath by looking out the window. Ghost stood straight, hands clasped in front of him, eyes calm but warm. The mother gave a weak laugh mixed with tears. Standing in the doorway was enough to change a child's life. Maddie looked at Rex, big eyes brimming again. Then she slid off the bed, walked straight to him, raised her arms like she wanted a hug but was shy. Rex understood. He knelt a little so they were eye to eye, and Maddie wrapped her arms around him tight, a small hug so fierce it felt like she wanted to leave a permanent mark on his chest. Rex rested a hand on her back, holding longer than he meant to, and whispered just for her, "You don't have to be afraid of the dark anymore." Maddie let go, rubbed her eyes, and was led out by CPS to prepare for her first safe night after the long nightmare. Before she crossed the threshold, she turned back and looked at Rex, Bear, and Ghost standing shoulder to shoulder like 3 immovable walls. "Will I see you again?" she asked, voice trembling like a plucked string. Rex gave the rarest smile that softened every line around his eyes. "Just keep riding your road, kid. It's a long one. We'll cross paths someday." Maddie nodded, clutching Ghost's jacket around her shoulders like a shield against everything she had survived. When she stepped into the hallway, sunset poured through the big windows at the end, bathing the room in warm orange. In that burning light, the 3 bikers' shadows stretched across the floor, silent as the last sentinels between a family just pulled back from the edge. As soon as Maddie and her mother were settled in a safe temporary placement, the 3 bikers left the hospital and rode back to Silver Butte Diner to pick up their bikes. The sun had slipped behind the western mountains, leaving streaks of red-orange like embers across the sky. The parking lot was quieter than it had been that afternoon. Just a few trucks cooling down and Donna standing framed in the doorway, arms folded but eyes glowing like the yellow light above the porch. Rex, Bear, and Ghost walked slowly toward their 3 motorcycles that had sat baking in the sun all day. Bear dropped onto his seat and ran a hand over the desert dust on his tank like he was patting an old horse. Ghost tightened his glove straps, squinting into the wind that was picking up as night fell. Rex stood between them, checking his luggage straps, every motion slow and familiar. No one spoke because some days don't need words. This was one of them. They were just reaching for their helmets when small footsteps echoed on the old porch tiles. "Rex, wait, Maddie." She came running, still swallowed by Ghost's jacket, holding a folded piece of paper tight in both hands. Donna followed just far enough to watch, but let the girl come on her own. Rex lowered his helmet and turned. Maddie stopped right in front of him, breathing quick little breaths. "I have this." She unfolded the paper with 2 small but steady hands, as if handing over something far bigger than a sheet. Under the diner's yellow sign, the pencil lines appeared. 3 motorcycles drawn in strong childish strokes, lined up between a messy-haired little girl and a tall dark shadow. At the top, in wobbly but proud letters, "My heroes." Bear glanced over and let out a low humph, like someone had just kicked him gently in the chest. Ghost turned away, pretending to adjust a mirror, but the corner of his mouth softened. Rex bent his head and took the drawing with both hands, like receiving a flag from a fallen comrade. He didn't speak right away. just studied every line, every smudge from Maddie's shaking fingers. Then he folded it carefully, slowly, and slipped it into the inside pocket of his vest, right over his heart, the place reserved for things he never intended to lose. Maddie looked up at him, voice lower but stronger than it had been in the hospital. "I won't forget you." Rex rested his weathered hand on her head and rubbed gently. "Your road is the one that matters, kid. Ride it steady." "That's enough." Maddie nodded, eyes wet but no longer shaking. Donna put a hand on her shoulder and led her back inside. The three bikers pulled on their helmets and mounted up. As they rolled out of the lot, Maddie stood beneath the silver Butte Diner sign and raised one small hand. Rex caught her in his mirror one last time. No words, but his eyes carried a silent vow. If that kid ever needed them again, any road could turn around. The three bikes melted into the desert dark, leaving only the fading thunder of engines in the wind, the sound of men who weren't heroes by any book definition, but were heroes, the way one rescued little girl had just named them. Months passed since that afternoon, when 3 motorcycles left Silver Butte Diner and a child stood under fading yellow light, clutching an oversized jacket like a talisman. Summer was gone. The desert had turned to the dry cold of late fall. Rex still rode the long hauls with Bear and Ghost, stopping in dusty towns, nameless roadside cafes, and highway corners only old travelers remember. One afternoon in Boulder City, they pulled into another diner, Desert Lily Diner, the one they always hit when running toward Hoover Dam. Rex took his usual booth, black coffee in front of him, that he rarely finished because it always went cold faster than his thoughts. There was no Donna from Silver Butte here, but it didn't matter. The road always had a place to sit quiet. While Bear argued with Ghost about whose turn it was to fill the tanks, the waitress came over with a thick cream-colored envelope stamped Clark County Family Services. "Somebody sent this for you 3, she said, setting it in front of Rex. "Addressed by description, to the oldest biker of the bunch." Bear laughed loud. Rex shrugged, tore it open. Inside wasn't just one sheet but a stack. First, the official letter. Derek Caldwell had gone to trial, and this time no smooth talk saved him. Multiple charges: domestic violence, child endangerment, unlawful imprisonment, obstruction of an officer, all heavy enough to put him away for years. Rex read it without changing expression, but his finger tapped the table edge once, old habit when justice finally ran straight. The second page was a child services progress report. Maddie Thompson now lived with her mother in Henderson, Nevada, in a subsidized apartment in a quiet area near an elementary school. She was in intensive child therapy, and the counselors noted she was reintegrating well with exceptional emotional resilience. The third page was a color photo. Maddie in a schoolyard holding a small gleaming gold medal that read Nevada Child Courage Award. Her mother beside her looking healthy, cheeks no longer bruised, eyes bright again. Maddie was smiling, a real smile, with no fear hiding behind it. Ghost leaned back studying the picture, lips pressed together like he was fighting a grin. Bear nodded slow, the kind of nod that sets a heavy weight down. But Rex hadn't turned to the last item. When he did, he pulled out a smaller envelope with careful childish handwriting trying hard to be neat. "Rex, Bear and Ghost, thank you for standing up when nobody else did. Because of that I now live safe with my mom. I even have my own room and I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. I'm learning to ride a bike, and Mom says maybe one day I can ride a motorcycle if I want. I will never forget you. Your friend Maddie." Tucked in the middle was a new drawing, still light shaky pencil lines, but much steadier. She had clearly improved. 3 motorcycles roaring down an endless highway, and a fourth, smaller bike trailing behind them a little ways with a little girl in an oversized helmet. Underneath, "Someday I'll ride too." Rex stared at it a long time. "So long?" Bear finally asked. "You planning to swallow the paper or what?" Rex shook his head, folded the letter with perfect care, no corner out of place, and slid it into the same pocket where the first My Heroes drawing lived. 2 small pieces of paper no bigger than a child's hand but heavy as lead inside his vest. "She's okay," Ghost said quietly, looking out at the parking lot where desert wind whipped fine sand around. "Kid's tougher than we thought." "No," Rex answered, buttoning the vest tight. "She's tougher than she thought." Bear stood, clapped Rex on the shoulder hard enough to rattle the coffee cup. "Let's roll." Road still long. They walked out into the Boulder City late afternoon. When the 3 bikes fired up, the sound deep, low, and braided together like a metal choir, Rex touched the pocket lightly, where Maddie's 2 drawings rested against his heart. The road ahead stretched silver under the sunset. and when they twisted the throttles the tires ate miles like there was no end. But somewhere between the wind, the engines and the burning sky, all three men thought the same thing, that they hadn't saved Maddie. They had just stood up. And the girl herself, with bare feet, terror in her throat, and courage in her heart, had found her own way out of the dark. Late fall again, the three bikers were running south, crossing the Nevada-Arizona line, when the sky held only the last scraps of light. They stopped at a little diner near Kingman, where the neon sign flickered in the desert wind, and the smell of burnt coffee mixed with distant truck noise. Rex took the last booth, the one that let him sit with his back to the wall. Habit of a man who had ridden far and seen enough to know a clear view is never wasted. Bear ordered a burger the size of a hubcap, Ghost stuck to water, and Rex kept his usual black coffee he'd barely sip. He opened his vest not to look for anything but to check the most important thing he carried, two neatly folded pieces of paper resting right over his heart where they belonged. He pulled out Maddie's latest letter, read again the wobbly "Someday I'll Ride Too," folded it perfectly and slid it back into the pocket that already held the first My Hero's drawing. Two pieces of paper, two moments, but the same story. The story of a child who found courage where no one expected her to. A story Rex knew would ride with him the rest of his days on the road. When they stepped outside, it was full dark. The highway lay long and black like a sleeping steel snake under a crescent moon. The night wind blew wide and empty, making men feel small, until engines woke up. Ghost turned the key first, deep clean growl like a big animal's heartbeat. Bear next, heavy and low enough to vibrate the ground. Rex last, the older rumble blending in, until the three notes made the diner windows tremble. Helmets on, gloves pulled tight, they rolled onto the road. No one spoke, no need. Headlights cut the dark, carving three long beams on the asphalt. When they cracked the throttles, the engines merged into one solid roar like a vow never spoken aloud. Wind slammed their leathers, but under that leather Rex's vest pocket stayed buttoned tight. Two small pieces of proof that sometimes just standing in the way once is enough to change someone's entire life. The highway opened ahead, endless, calling, full of miles they hadn't touched yet. And they rode into it, three small figures under a giant sky, carrying something heavier than steel, the responsibility they never asked for but would never dodge. Because the truth is, the road has every kind of person, runners, chasers, those who hurt. But it also has men in leather with ink on their arms, rough voices, and the willingness to plant themselves between a shaking child and the man trying to crush her. And as the three motorcycles tore toward the horizon, their red taillights fading, but the engine thunder still echoing in the wind, they left behind one unspoken conclusion. Not everyone in leather is dangerous. Sometimes they're the ones who stand between the bad guys and the smallest kid in the world. If this story touched you, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss more journeys full of humanity. Share the video so more people know that sometimes just one person willing to stand up is enough to change an entire life.